Okay, as you can see, I've got a pretty tough act to follow here. The first thing I'm going to make a few brief comments. The first point I'd like to make is I don't think we should lose sight of the fact, and I think Ambassador Yaida here has sort of pointed to that bringing agriculture into the GATT was a huge achievement. And despite what we have said in this book about some of the limitations of the domestic support disciplines, we shouldn't lose sight of that. Dating back to D. Gale Johnson's famous book about world agriculture in disarray, studies done by FAO involving jostling over there and then subsequently by OECD, all pointed to the fact that something needed to be done about domestic agricultural support, and it's very important, not only from an operational point of view, but also from a political point of view, that was included in disciplines in the WTO, in the GATT. So what I'm going to do is to highlight very, very briefly just 4 points focusing on what we have learned and what in the book we point out between these disciplines on domestic support and the reform of domestic agricultural policies. I'm going to limit myself to developed countries purposefully because that, of course, is where most of the focus has been, on the countries who have the money to provide major subsidies to their farmers. And in true economist style, I'm going to give you 2, on the one hand, positive points, and 2, on the other hand, negative points. My first positive point is that I think the disciplines have provided a framework within which countries have been able to move to less trade-distorting policies. Some people have been critical of the idea of box shifting, moving policies out of the amber, let's say, into the green. But in reality, in many cases, that has been a positive move, and I think the very clearest example is the European Union, where we've had significant changes and reforms in policy that are reflected in a movement into green box support. Unfortunately, we also have some counterexamples. Norway has been mentioned. I love Norway. It's a beautiful country. I love the people. But unfortunately, some of the stuff that they've been doing with the green box isn't quite in the same mold as the European Union. And you could question both, as has already been mentioned, whether certain policies should be in the green box at all, or whether, they would qualify under the green box provisions. Now a negative point. I think we've already said this, but it deserves to be stressed. The problem with the domestic support disciplines is that they do allow a substantial latitude for countries to make what I would call cosmetic changes in domestic policies. Not real changes. They affect the levels of notified support, but really they don't change the economic impact of the policies in any significant way. Norway, again, provides a clear example here. What they've been doing is essentially saying, well, we've been phasing out our prices, our support, administered prices. Has anything changed? No. Japan did the same with rice. And we don't cover Korea in our book, but the Koreans have also, I think, learned this trick and have been doing the same thing too. So that's negative. A further negative point is, I think it's really ironic that the weakest part of the domestic support discipline is on market price support, which is the very thing that economists and just about everybody else have been most critical about. So it's kind of ironic, that well, the non-exempt direct payments are disciplined more effectively, I think, than market price support, but market price support is the problem. And as has already been mentioned, several countries have taken advantage of that. Japan, Norway, we could mention Korea, and of course the US, by redefining its dairy policy in the 2008 Farm Act without any really appreciable change in dairy policy. So, we're obviously learning. We're fast learners in the US. And then finally, let me finish on one quick positive note. I think it's been said, but I'd like to stress it. I do think that the proposed disciplines under Doha, they would make a real contribution. They're horrendously complicated. It's very difficult to figure out exactly what they mean, but there are some important things in there that would make a difference. Reducing the de minimis, it would be important. Squeezing the water out of the total AMS commitment would be important. And I think these would make positive contributions to further reductions in trade distorting support, despite the weakness of the market price support measure that we have in there. So I think it's those of us who've been involved in following Doha and working on Doha and promoting Doha, I think we'll all feel that it's an enormous pity, actually, if we cannot take advantage of some of the progress that has been made in those negotiations on domestic support and in the other areas.